Hey everyone, my name's Jessie. Welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to talk about the books that I think have my favorite romances in them. So I know we're getting close to Valentine's Day, so I wanted to celebrate Valentine's Day talking about some books that I think just have the sweetest romances. And I don't read a ton of books in the romance genre. This video, I'm going to instead talk about some fantasy books that I think have adorable romances in them. I did do a video previously talking about some of my favorite romance books in the romance genre and more contemporary genres, so if you want to see that, I'll link it down below. But today we're going to be focusing specifically on fantasy books. So without further ado, let's get started. The first book I have to talk about, it's a young adult fantasy, and it is known for its romance, and that is Strange the Dreamer by Laini Taylor. This is a beautifully written book that has just the most adorable romance. Now I will say, this romance is more insta-love, which I'm usually not a fan of. I don't know anyone who absolutely loves the insta-love trope. However, I think this book does it so well, and it's just such a pure, sweet, innocent romance that I just adored so much. I know so many people love this book. The writing in this book is spectacular. It's beautiful and lyrical, and that's not something I usually love, but this book just takes things that I don't typically love and makes me love them. It's amazing. So if you haven't checked out Strange the Dreamer, I definitely recommend it, especially if you're looking for just a pure, sweet, cute romance. I feel like I should quickly add though that this book is not all sweetness and cuteness. It definitely hits on some heavier themes and definitely is a little bit sadder in some parts. So it's not all like sunshines and rainbows. I feel like I should add that so that you don't go in thinking like, oh, it's gonna be so cute. And you're like, oh my gosh, Jessie, you didn't warn me about all the like heavy stuff that happens. This is a heavy book, but it has a really cute romance, I promise. The next book is another young adult fantasy. I'm sure so many people have heard of it. It is the Infernal Devices trilogy by Cassandra Clare, starting with Clockwork Angel. Now this book has another trope that I think the majority of people don't necessarily love in their books, and that is a love triangle. However, like the previous book I talked about, that takes the love triangle trope, which is something I usually really don't like, and does it right. It is amazing. Like, I love this love triangle. Like, it's the perfect love triangle. I love it. This is the only time I've ever loved a love triangle. And it's like, I can see the main character with like either option. It's amazing. And the third book in this trilogy and the way it wraps it all up is just so, I sobbed throughout this trilogy. It was beautiful and heartbreaking, but sweet, and it's just amazing. I'd like to add that I'm not a huge fan of the Mortal Instruments and like the Shadowhunters books in general, but I love this trilogy. And I think that the historical time period that this is set in really adds to the atmosphere and adds to the feeling of just being swept off your feet into this romance. I loved it. So I highly recommend this one, even if you weren't necessarily a fan of the Mortal Instruments. This one is, in my opinion, a step up from that, and I adored it. That love triangle though. All right, and one more young adult fantasy book that I wanted to talk about, and then the rest are gonna be all adult fantasy picks. The last young adult book that I have to talk about is The Shadow of the Fox trilogy by Julie Kagawa. Oh my goodness. Talk about the sweetest romance ever. I love this romance so much in this trilogy. It is the sunshine grump trope. Is that what it's called? Like the really grumpy guy and the really like sweet, sunshiny, optimistic girl. Like, it's just the combination of these two characters and their journey that they go on together and the romance that blossoms is just so pure and beautiful. I loved it. I loved it, loved it. And the way, again, this one ends, the final book in the trilogy, it's just so sweet and amazing. I love this trilogy for its romance and for the dynamic between the two main characters. I think that that is the strongest part of this whole trilogy, and it's what kept me reading and kept me invested, because I rooted for them so much and I adored them so much. So if you love that like grumpy sunshine trope, look no further than this Japanese-inspired young adult fantasy. I will also say that this book does have some heavier things that happen in the later books. It's not all like sunshines and happiness. There's definitely some more stuff that happens that's pretty heavy. But overall, I look back on this trilogy just thinking that I had the greatest time with it. It was adorable. And I love like the mythology and the world building in this trilogy. Like if you like watching animes or reading mangas, I've heard that this trilogy is fantastic for fans of that. So check it out. It's amazing. Highly recommend. Now let's get into some adult fantasy picks that I have. First being Black Sun by Rebecca Roanhorse. So this is a wonderfully unique fantasy that is based on pre-Columbian Americas. And I love not only just like the culture and the world building and the unique magic, but the romance. There's a romance subplot, and it's very much a subplot. This is not like entirely about the romance whatsoever. Like I think the previous books that I picked up have much heavier romance. This one, it's a more subtle subplot, but it's amazing. And I adored the two main characters that had this romance. It was a very unlikely romance, and I adored it. I loved it. I was rooting so hard for it, and I just have to know what's gonna happen because the ending, oh my goodness, it was such a cliffhanger, I feel like. I wouldn't say, you know, if you're wanting just a romance in a fantasy setting, I wouldn't necessarily say that this is the book to pick up, but if you like a good romance subplot in your fantasy books, then this is a great one. And it's between two very unlikely characters, but it somehow just works so well. So, I love Black Sun. The next one, I can't not mention this book because it's, how many times am I going to say adorable and cute and sweet in this video? I don't even want to try to count. But The House in the Cerulean Sea by TJ Klune. Not only is this just the cutest, sweetest book, I know I said those words again, but it's like the best cinnamon roll of a book. It's so cozy, it's such a warm hug, it has the sweetest message, and the romance, it's a slow build romance, so it's not necessarily like the book isn't about the romance, that isn't the main focus, but it's the subplot, and it's just the way it develops and blossoms, and it's just so cute. I loved it. I loved it. I love when romances make the characters the best versions of themselves, and I think that this book really demonstrated that, how a romance can bring out the best in someone, and it was just so sweet. Another book that has a fantastic romance subplot is the Faithful and the Fallen series by John Gwynne. I'm holding up Valor, which is the second book in the series, because this is kind of where the romance starts. You definitely don't get it in the first book, but there's a huge cast of characters in this whole series, and there's a couple characters that have this romance subplot going on, and I loved it. I loved it. It was between my two favorite characters. I just loved how it developed, and I loved the dynamic between these two characters. I thought it was fantastic. It was so well done. So if you love epic fantasy that's like heavy on the battles, it also has those sweeter moments kind of woven in, definitely pick this one up. And that romance is so good. It's probably because I just love these two characters independently on their own, and the fact that they were paired up was just the most magnificent thing. So, highly recommend The Faithful and the Fallen anyway, outside of its romance, but that romance did enhance the series quite a bit for me. And then the final book I have to talk about is The Bear and the Nightingale by Catherine Arden. So this is another one where the romance kind of is a slow build. It develops throughout the whole trilogy, and it's very much not the focus. And it's done that way on purpose, and I loved that, because the main character of Vasya is so strong, so independent, so amazing on her own. I just love her dynamic with the love interest and what it does to her. I love it. I love it so much. And it's a very, very much a subplot, which I appreciated, because it did not define Vasya in any sort of way. Vasya was very much still her own person on her own journey, but it was just there kind of in the background blossoming, and I loved it, I loved it, I loved it. So I love this trilogy for the writing, beautifully, beautifully told. The main character, Vasya, is amazing, and the atmosphere that this creates, the magic of it is just beautifully executed. And the romance is also really cute. I liked it. So those are some books that I think have really, really great romances in them. Did you see any on this list that you would also agree with? Let me know in the comments down below. And what are some books that are in the fantasy genre that have fantastic romances? I would love to know. I'm always looking to pick up more of those, so leave those comments down below. And again, if you want to check out a video where I actually talk about romance books, I will leave that video down below. Thank you all so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, make sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you'd like to, and I will see you all in my next one. Bye.